I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I need a motion to adopt the agenda. Commissioner Carabelli, supported by Commissioner Kraft. Take that vote. You want to come up? And it passes 11-0. I need a motion to approve the minutes dated May 8th, 2019. Commissioner Romano, supported by Commissioner Ha. Let's vote. Was this the right? No, minutes. And it passes 11-0. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Public participation? Calling once, calling twice, and that's an end to that. Agenda item 6, department recommendations. I need a motion to recommend to full board a budget amendment by Macomb Community Action, Children and Family Services, Michigan Energy Assistance Program. The grant is for $40,000. I need a motion. Commissioner Juzé and supported by Commissioner Brown. Mr. Cutler, would you like to speak?
Thank you. This actually, I'm looking for a budget amendment here. We are doing a reduction in the amount of money that we're receiving from Michigan Community Action in partnership with Michigan Public Services Commission. They had originally given us a grant for $336,000 that you have previously approved. So this is a $40,000 reduction in those funds. This was due to part of our utility assistance is an affordable care plan or affordable plan where people make payments, affordable payment plans, and they had underestimated the amount of future outlays those monies were going to have to be. So we were notified of this. We refunded the money, and I'm just coming in front of you to reduce our budget according to what our grantor did.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. We need to vote. Okay, do we have any speakers? No speakers. Okay. Let's vote. Next up, I need a motion to receive and file a presentation by Community Mental Health. It's an update by Dave Pankotai, our Chief Executive Officer. Motion by Commissioner Kraft, supported by Commissioner Romano. Hi, welcome. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. I was asked to speak on 3 topics. The budget, the authority status, and our recent cyber attack. I'll start with our cyber attack. Our servers were attacked. It went Friday night into Saturday. We were notified. Our 24-hour staff started noticing computer issues and notified our IT staff. They went out on site, discovered some problems. They were able to lock down all of our local servers. Our electronic medical record was never impacted. We use a vendor for that, Peter Chang Enterprises, and their servers are off-site and protected. We are back up and running this morning, and due to the hard work of our IT staff, we also had a cybersecurity team on site first thing Monday morning, Access Interactive, and they did a wonderful job and were able to recover all of our software. So we did file, the police were on site Monday morning, and we filed a police report. We notified the FBI, and we're meeting Friday afternoon with about the insurance coverage for this event. There is a cybersecurity insurance policy in place, which should help us offset some of those costs. Any questions on the cybersecurity attack?
I don't have any speakers. Okay.
On the budget side, we did submit an updated budget earlier this year. We have a monitoring plan in place that's focusing on several of our key areas. I will mention on the revenue side some changes and updates first. The Milliman is the actuarial firm that the state of Michigan uses to set our capitation rates. They do that by crunching data and comparing us to other parts of the state of Michigan. We were able to get finally a data dictionary and additional details about exactly what sorts of information they're looking at and taking into consideration when they're setting our rates. We focused in on the areas that Macomb was different from the other regions. The severity of the person's diagnosis is one, and the residential living arrangements was another. We were underreporting the number of people who live in a specialized adult foster care home or a group home, and those were impacting our capitation rates. So Milliman was out on site. They were from about 9 to 2. We had very good in-depth discussions, and we're working to improve our data submissions to the state. The autism services remain an area of concern. The state expanded that benefit and oversees it very carefully. Last fiscal year, we recorded about a $6 million deficit just specific to autism. We're tracking it closer this year. The state is considering budget increases from a 3% to 5.75%, according to a Cranes article on the projected budget for next fiscal year. That was the Cranes, okay. Other areas are the inpatient hospital. It's a very expensive service, and it's needed. It's a crisis service, so there's no prior authorization. If somebody presents and they need to utilize that service, that's what we have. We're looking to expand our alternatives to inpatient hospitalization with things like crisis residential, intensive crisis stabilization, which is a team of people that would go out into the community and help keep that person safe in the community. We currently have a hospital diversion rate of about 30%. From my past experience, we can have a major impact on our diversion rate. So we've already started now screening people face-to-face and referring them to other levels of care. We started with children, and the results were positive, and we're expanding that to the adult side now. So if we can keep more people safe in the community, use the hospital only for the people who really need only that level of care, we'll be better off on the financial side. The respite services, basically there to provide relief to the caregivers in the community. It's a frequently used service, and people were using it to almost its full extent. We put some controls and changes in place. We had to notify the state of what we were doing, and everything is trending well in that area. Autism. We've made some other changes, and we're tracking this as all part of this work plan closely. Things are trending well, but we do continue to watch it closely. Also with the inpatient hospitalization, we're rolling out a new software package. It's called MCG, and it's what most of the other regions are going to be using. It's part of the parity legislation where people with mental health issues have to get the full array of benefits like they do on the physical health side. So it's a standardized way of looking at people and how much services they should start with, and then we'll be tracking our exceptions to that and comparing notes with our partner regions. Any questions on the budget?
Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One quick question. On the autism increase being suggested by the state, former Lieutenant Governor Kelly was the champion, one of many,
Right.
on that subject. Do you happen to know who the champion is now, or maybe you know?
There's staff at the department. Lisa Grost has
Okay.
been very involved, remains very active. They did pass the autism cost containment legislation, and they did give, I believe it's about $500,000 to the Autism Alliance of Michigan to look at some of the utilization measures. So the state's trying to get a better handle on the uses of those services as well. But outside of that, can't point to any specific champion. There's Dave Meter, who's at DTE. He remains active, and he helped get the alliance started.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown?
Thank you. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate you coming out and giving us a report as we asked you to do. But it'd be nice to have something in writing. You got major budget issues over there, crisis proportion, actually, and yet we'd have any information on it, in writing or
Well,
anything.
our computers have been down and unavailable.
Is that the
so-
result of that hacking attack last night?
Yeah, we were all locked down. No, it happened over the weekend. So I was locked out of everything until earlier today when we were finally getting email and access to our documents. I
That
can
would've
share
been 6
something back.
days. That would've been yeah. All right. Yeah, it'd be good to have some, I'd like to just look at the numbers. And what's the status of the repair to the deficit over there? What's the, you've got issues, major budget issues over there, I understand.
I gave the budget update. We're tracking well towards our budget, which you
How much
guys
of a
reviewed.
deficit are you under? You had a deficit?
The revised budget we submitted did not have a deficit in it, and you've reviewed and approved that.
Yes. But nothing's changed? I've heard some information. I'd like to see send us some writing, something in writing. Appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Commissioner Carabelli?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of like on the same lines, my understanding, secondhand, don't know if it's correct or not, but we're basically, there's no reserves left. That's my understanding. Is that your understanding?
We have, in the FSR, the financial status report that goes up to the state, it forces you to report into specific categories. When you do that, the most recent one showed our ISF, Internal Services Fund, had less than $200,000 in it. Our total unrestricted is between $3 and $4 million. So that's our buffer.
Okay, I guess without having the information in front of us, if you could provide, that'd be great, because before you came, I think it was $4 million we put in the reserves to show that we had the money in there. And everybody I asked, some people say it was spent, some people say it wasn't, and I'm wondering if that's the $4 million, that's the county's general fund money that we put in. You wouldn't know, you weren't there yet. I need to get a little bit more in depth of actually having something. So, and I know you're at a loss, and I understand that what it is.
Well, we're also doing our mid-year report. Cindy Dudek is our CFO. She might have some more detail for you.
If I can just add a few updates. As far as specifics, if I could first address that, as Dave mentioned, we are in the process of completing, it's called a mid-year status report. Next Friday, actually, it's due up to the State Department. What we could do, with Dave's blessing, is that once that's finalized, we take that to our mental health board, and then we could share it with you.
That would be great, Madam Chair. I think that's something that would help us.
We appreciate that, thank
There's
you.
a lot of concern, long-term concern. You know, instead of waiting till the building's fully engulfed, we'd like to get involved on the trash can that may be on fire. So, putting it mildly. So, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Another
Fireman
point, if I could add as well, is our organization at CMH is working together with county finance. So we are having regular meetings with Steve Schmiegel, Steve Adair, as far as getting in sync with reporting and updates. I think there's some confusion, and I know I've had the confusion. It's hard to explain. There's two different areas. When we look at a budget, we're looking at providing a balanced budget. So we're right now going into our next budget process. And in fact, I'm working again with county finance as far as how they want that. I think there's been a lot of change. There's been transition for years, staff, both CMH and county. And so we're trying to get a better understanding of that expectation. And so again, I still call myself a newbie. I've been in the role now, it's going on 3 years, but it's still, it's overwhelming at times. But I am getting that better understanding that the expectations with the budget may have been different. We want to provide a balanced budget, so when we're going through that process, we're looking at what our revenue is and how to make that work for us. With that being said, then we do our internal financial service report, where it's reporting on actuals along with our projections and how the year is trending. So slightly different. I mean, we look at budget as one thing as far as balancing, but then also looking at where we're currently at. And again, that's done quarterly, with that first one being due next week.
Madam Chair, just to comment on that, and that's great, but I don't have anything in front of me, but I thought you had to have a $12 million reserves in case something happened. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But again,
There's a maximum of a 7.5% that we're able to keep in the reserves. That's a ceiling. There is no set floor in our contract. So it's a maximum of 7.5%.
so what would 7.5% be?
It's about 14 million.
Okay. All right, and that's in case something happened, you had the reserves to be able to cover to pay for what was going on.
The risk corridor for us is 7.5%. It's, if we go over the first 5% of the overage is on us, and then half of the next 5% or 2.5%. So that equals the 7.5% that they allow us to keep on reserve.
Right, and we have 3 to 4 million, and it should be closer to 14.
Right.
Okay, so that is a concern. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it's not a contract mandate to have the maximum. The authority status was the third topic. We did have our first task force meeting on Monday.
We have one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Commissioner Kleinfeld?
And I don't know as much about this as Commissioner Carabelli, but when she was talking about, making sure we have a balanced budget, he's referring to money that we put in. And so I guess we're wondering, is that balanced budget minus that money, or is that using that money to balance the budget, number one? And number two, you just said there's a ceiling on what you can have, but not a floor. I thought the whole reason for the 4 million was because there was a floor, a bottom line that you had to have, or you would be punished. Otherwise, there would be no reason for us to give the 4 million over, that our understanding was would never be spent. Did I say that correctly? Could you respond to that?
Yes, there is, contractually, there is no minimum. The state has some general language in our contract that speaks to, a certain ability to function well. But they've never set a specific percentage or dollar amount to that.
So there's no punishment. Wasn't there a if you didn't have the reserve, something would happen? Would you, Commissioner Carabelli, you know better than I do.
Madam Chair, and again, you're the new director, you're reading something, interpreting, it was explained, I believe, differently to the board the last time, and the actuality was they went to the state of Michigan legislator and they got X amount of $1 million, so that could go into the reserves as well, along with the money we put in, because it had to be a minimum of X. Maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but that's the way it was explained to us the last time.
Yeah, I agree.
That it had to be a minimum in there of reserves. But again, it's not in front of us, and I don't want to belabor it because we don't
I
have the.
can look into it and
Okay,
report
yeah,
back.
because just so you know, we wouldn't have agreed if there's no minimum, why would we just hand over $4 million? So we may have to delve into this a little bit further at a later date.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if I may, just to add, hopefully, some clarification on this. Again, I think there's two different areas we're talking about. The ISF is the Internal Services Fund, and that is by contract where we're only allowed to have a maximum of 7.5% of our total revenue, which is just what Dave mentioned was around 14 million. That's the Internal Services Fund that we report on our FSRs. That is by our contract. And so even when I've met with the individuals at the State Department seeking clarification, you give us this maximum, 7.5. Unfortunately, we're not in that situation. What happens when we don't? It's called a fully funded ISF. What happens? And the penalty, per se, that they've not confirmed, and again, this is on the state, they don't say what happens. The only thing that we've had to go by is what happened to another region, and that's where they had company Beacon come in. And so there's been a letter, I think you were, a default letter. We've not received one. We don't want to receive one, but nobody's ever confirmed what that minimum is, as well as it was back in the days of Tom Renwick when I was out at the State Department. They couldn't give us an answer as to a minimum and what happens. On the unrestricted, and actually I think Steve Smeagol might be another one that we could reach into his background, the 4 million, and again, forgive me if that was at a time probably when I was just coming in, there is a roughly 4 million amount that every year we go and bring to you, and it's like 3.9, I want to say. But I don't think that's a give. We have an unrestricted balance, and again, Steve would probably be the best to confirm what that's about. It's historic. It's been out there. There's two pieces of it. And again, to the tune of about 4 million every year. So I'm not sure what that 4 million give would be that you're referring to.
Okay,
We'll provide
Okay.
more detail.
okay, thank you.
The authority status, we'll end on a. So we had our first meeting. The Community Mental Health Board passed a resolution asking me to form a task force to begin looking at the pros and cons. They wanted a good cross-section of the community participation. So there is representation from this body. Commissioner Kraft is on it, and Crystal is on it. The CMH board members, Kathy Vosberg and Linda Bush. We have 2 providers, 2 parents of people who were served in our system, 2 people who were themselves served in our system. Ended up being about 15 people in total. So we kicked it off with an overview of the process and some of the terms and jargon, which we understand. We speak a different language. And we're off to a good start. We started listing the pros and cons of remaining an agency under the Macomb County governmental structure or becoming an authority that contracts directly with the state of Michigan for those service and those funds. We are scheduled to meet again on the 24th of this month, and we are already starting to get into some of the financial detail, which I think will help answer some of your questions too. What exactly goes back and forth between the Macomb County and the community mental health as far as some of the legal services, human resources, all of those, and the buildings and fleet, and how closely are we connected, and what are the pros and cons at that level. So we're also speaking to a financial consultant Friday afternoon. He offered just to give us an overview, and then we'll see what steps we need to take after that. And we've been talking to another legal consultant who's helped form a number of the other regional entities in the state of Michigan. Any questions about authority?
I don't have anybody up for any questions. No?
We'll keep you posted on that as we move forward as well.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
What's your time frame to complete this?
That came up at our meeting. The resolution says 6 months, and then it would have to come back to the Community Mental Health Board for an extension. We talked in the meeting, and we're looking more at 3 to 4, and to have meetings about once or twice a month. We thought July being a tough month, we might only get one in there, but then we can do about 2 meetings a month. We got a lot accomplished in the first 2-hour meeting, and we're doing work for that group in between times.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here today. We need to vote on this, take a vote. We did a motion, I believe, at the beginning. Yeah. And it passes 12-0. Next up, agenda item 8, we have a resolution. I need a motion to recommend to full board. It's to adopt resolution, sorry, I've put my glasses on, 2019-3400. It's a resolution urging Congress to support the Excellence in Mental Health and Addiction Treatment Expansion Act, and that is brought to you by myself and Commissioner Kraft. Do we have a motion? Commissioner Kraft, and support by Commissioner Druze. Let's take a vote. I'm sorry, any comments?
Just, what would be the cost of this to the federal budget?
Hold on, I'm sorry, I'm pulling you up.
Does anybody know what the cost of this program would be if we participate to the federal budget, or, I mean, we know what the positives are, but is there, what are the actual costs of it?
I'm looking to see if the specifics are in here. Yes, you know what, we're just moving this on to full board, so we can have that information to you specifically by, that specific
Okay,
information. by full board.
also, if there's an opportunity to have the organizations who have lined up in support of the program and those that may have opposed it, so I can get an idea of what the arguments may be on this.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We'll do that. Can we have a vote to move it to full board? And the vote passes 12-0. Next up, we have a presentation by Sierra Club. Mike Berkowitz, am I saying that correct? Come on up, he's here to present to us. He's the Legislative and Political Director for the Sierra Club of Michigan. Can I have a motion to receive and file the presentation? Commissioner Kleinfeld, supported by Commissioner Myjack. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners and members of the Health and Human Services Committee. We appreciate you taking the time to hear our presentation today. My name is Mike Berkowitz. I am the Legislative and Political Director of the Sierra Club Michigan chapter. With me, I have Gail Philbin, our State Director, who leads our Food Policy Coalition, the most prominent food policy coalition in Michigan. She's going to be doing the majority of the talking. But just to kick things off, we represent 150,000 members all across the state of Michigan. We have 12,755 Sierra Club members and supporters right here in Macomb County. I just checked in our database right before I came over here. And we are the oldest and largest environmental nonprofit in the country. We were founded, our Michigan chapter, in 1967 around protecting sleeping bear dunes up in northern Michigan. And ever since, we've been working very actively. We have a local group called the Southeast Michigan Group that operates here in Macomb County, Oakland County, and Wayne County as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gail Philbin to kick off our presentation.
Hi. I'm really impressed that you guys are even considering this, so I really appreciate it. Seems like you're more, I don't know, more educated, progressive group of individuals to even know that this is an issue in the state and that it's something worth, all right, sorry. Anyway, I'm just curious. No. Is there a way to do like a pointer thing on this thing, or is that?
I think if you use the mouse, it'll show up on their screen.
Yeah, there'll be things that I would like to point to, but that's okay. Okay, so basically I'd just like to try to build the case for the fact that we do need a ban on the application of waste on frozen and snow-covered ground. And for the purposes of a shorthand, I'm going to call it SNOFRO, the SNOFRO ban. It's a lot easier. So, do I hit this?
Yep, or you can use the arrows on the keyboard.
Okay. You may be familiar with what these operations are. They're often called factory farms, industrial livestock operations, animal factories. The federal government calls them concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs for short. And it's essentially an approach to raising farm animals in order to maximize production output and minimize production costs. The result is that we have too many animals generating way too much waste for the land to absorb in a safe manner, and the method of storing the waste leads to a lot of spills, leaks, runoff, and then ultimately polluted water. And the reality is that the system, which is a heavily subsidized system, is unsustainable and outsources the cost of doing business to the taxpayers and to the local residents, and it has extreme impacts on the environment, public health, the farm workers, and animal welfare. Just a brief history on factory farms. And the industrial approach to agriculture took place essentially after World War II. There were a lot of chemicals left over from the war, and they found new uses for them. And there was a lot of pressure from the government, especially in the late 70s, 80s, with the Ag Secretary Earl Butz. Some people may not remember that name, who pressured farms to get bigger or get out. In the 70s, with the Clean Water Act, they identified animal feeding operations, or AFOs. And then the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit was created to regulate activities associated with concentrated animal feeding operations. And basically, these are animals that have been, are, or will be stabled or confined and fed or maintained for a total of 45 days or more in any 12-month period. And crops, vegetation, forage, growth, or post-harvest residues are not sustained in the normal growing season over any portion of the lot or facility. So a CAFO is an AFO with certain animal thresholds, which I'll show on the next slide. You can see, for instance, Michigan's a big dairy and poultry state, and dairy, for instance, a typical, the minimum threshold for a large CAFO there is 700 or more animals, and we have as many as 3,000 and 4,000 dairy CAFOs in Michigan, so you can imagine there's quite a lot of waste being generated. It's far larger than the minimum size a CAFO needs to be. There's just under 300 CAFOs in Michigan. There's roughly about 17,000 livestock operations overall in Michigan, but only just under 300 are CAFOs. That essentially translates to hundreds, thousands, and millions of animals, depending upon the species, kept indoors for life in inhumane conditions, generating millions of gallons of untreated waste. And that's key, it's untreated, so human waste is treated. This stuff is not, it's just put on ground. And the majority of the CAFO waste, as I said, comes from dairy and egg layer operations in Michigan. And most facilities are actually family-owned. They're not corporate farms. That's a scenario that plays out in other states, but here, mostly family farms. Just for perspective, in case you think that this might not be an issue in your area because you don't have a lot of factory farms. Did I miss a slide? I guess not.
I think that's coming up.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, you missed one.
Did I? Yeah, I thought so.
That's the one that shows there's none in Macomb.
Yeah. Oh, I guess you can look, in this slide you can see it too. You can see that there's one, right, the closest one to you is, there you go, yeah. And the other ones are a little bit north, and then as you see, the thumb is concentrated heavily with a lot of them. Lest you think that that doesn't mean a problem for you, you can see that how water flows in the state. So basically, it's flowing towards the Great Lakes, and then it's coming down through the, like Lake Huron, so it does actually impact your shorelines and your water supplies. So that's why it should be a concern to you. This is just an illustration of how far we've come in terms of damaging our water quality in Michigan. Essentially, half the state is in some kind of impaired watershed condition of one kind or another. And there are a variety of sources, but agriculture has been identified as the biggest source of contributor to the algae blooms that we have problems with both in the Great Lakes and inland. We have a lot of algae problems as well in inland lakes. And then here you see a chart of all the St. Clair Detroit watershed CAFOs. So you have 4 with a total of just under 4,000 dairy animals and about 2,400 beef cattle. And that's the Ingleside operation, is a beef cattle operation. So that's probably a feedlot, but I don't know really anything about it. And just for perspective, a dairy cow generates about 30,000 pounds of dry manure, but then they add water to it. So it can be stored in lagoons as well as applied on the land. And just some facts about CAFOs in Michigan. As I said, the nutrients from industrial agriculture are a key factor in the growth of toxic algae blooms, including the one that affected the water for Toledo and southern Michigan in 2014. Saginaw Bay, Lake St. Clair, Lake Macatawa all have had toxic outbreaks. As bad as the one that hits the city of Toledo. The difference is the location of it. That one happened to be near Toledo's water intake system, so that's why it affected their drinking water. And Lake Superior last year saw an unprecedented algae bloom, which is not, that's also, climate change also factors into the prevalence of algae blooms more and more each summer. And 80% of the Lake Erie's annual water intake comes through the St. Clair River. So whatever happens in Lake Huron and Lake Superior ends up in Lake Erie. So it's all one big picture. So basically, and that's a picture of a dairy flushing. So they have to flush out all the milk house waste. So that's a lot of what the waste is that's contributing to the water quality problem. So basically, you have sustainable systems, which we've gone a long way from, and the industrial approach. And sustainable farms are basically integrated systems of livestock management. There's appropriate numbers of animals for the land so that you can reincorporate the manure into the soil in a way that it stays on the land and the nutrients are taken up by the crops. And composted manure actually stays on fields because it's broken down by the natural process. CAFOs generate way too much waste and for the land to handle, and so you have to develop systems with lagoons and waste conveyance systems, which require the need for subsidies because the farms need that money to be able to purchase those mechanisms in order to handle their waste. So they're generating this problem that then we have to pay for. And then part of the problem in Michigan is that they are required to have sufficient storage for 6 months of the year, but often the operators are not planning correctly, or for whatever reasons it's not being managed correctly, and they end up finding out that they have waste that they need to get rid of, so it ends up on frozen or snow-covered ground. And what they do is it can be sprayed on the land, it can be injected in the soil, but in one way or another it either goes off the land through snow melt, or it goes through pathways underground like wormholes or roots that have already burrowed into the ground, and it makes its way into underground tiles that then take it directly into the local waterways and into the Great Lakes. And the reality is, if there's no crops growing, there's no reason to be putting this. It's not fertilizer for anything. What it really is just a way to dump waste on ground, and that's what's happening. And as I mentioned, there's lots of water quality issues. There's millions of gallons of water consumed by dairy operations, especially to clean milk houses, to liquefy the waste for application on the land. It's untreated waste, and a CAFO produces the equivalent of urine and feces of 16,000 humans, and this is all untreated. And they contain disease-causing pathogens, chemicals, antibiotics, heavy metals. Dissolved phosphorus is a big problem because there are best management practices that CAFO owners use to limit runoff, but when it's dissolved, it's in the water, so it runs off with the water. So dissolved phosphorus, which is a key component in toxic algae, is not limited by best management practices. So it's all kind of conspiring to create this problem. Let's see. Public health obviously is another problem. There's a lot of advisories for skin contact with water that's been poisoned by E. coli and other bacteria. Air quality around these facilities can be extremely bad, especially when they're spraying on land. 168 gases are emitted from CAFO waste, including ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and methane. There's a lot of respiratory disease incidents in schools and homes near CAFOs. Antibiotic resistance is a part of the whole system. There's 70 to 80% of the antibiotics sold in the United States go to animal use, not to humans. And this is partly what, in fact, and this is all part of the industrial system, but there was just a story that in Florida, they're now using erythromycin, which I've used for pneumonia and bronchitis myself, putting it on orange trees, which doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But anyway, so this is a big problem. And then the picture that's here depicts another problem that you don't really hear about, which is the animals die in these facilities, and they're often just dumped in the compost pile. And so that attracts animals, flies, rats, vermin, et cetera. And then the economic community impacts, externalizing costs, needing taxpayer subsidies to cover the costs to build lagoons. It can pollute local wells. For instance, the city of Blissfield, I believe, about 10 years ago, had to build their own treatment plant because of the CAFOs surrounding the city that ultimately poisoned the local water, and they had to build a treatment system for that. Lowers the property's values of neighbors. And for instance, trucks that have to haul the waste to fields to apply it damage the local roads, but then it's not the CAFOs that pay for that, it's the local communities. So the immediate solution to this, there's long-term solutions, but the immediate one is to just first and foremost ban the application of waste on frozen and snow-covered ground with no exceptions. Right now, there's loopholes that allow, it's not actually made, it's not banned by the state, they strongly discourage the activity, but CAFO owners can do it, and they do it. So we need an absolute ban on it for all size farms, not just CAFOs. It required sufficient storage to avoid needing to do this in the first place. And there needs to be planning for sufficient storage, which doesn't happen all the time, but we actually need to emphasize to the agency that oversees these operations that they need to make sure that these folks do have sufficient storage. And keep the rain and snow out of these storage pits, which is another issue that makes them overflow. What isn't a solution is digesters, which has been suggested, and I think there might even be legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. And the reason for this is because they also are prone to spills and explosions. Animal waste is not an efficient energy source because it's already gone through the animal's body and some of the energy has been used already. And the waste is still there. So you still have to, in fact, there's 2 spills. I think I included that handout with materials I sent. There were 2 spills, one just in April in the Coldwater River watershed, which in Berry County, Prairie View Dairy. There was just a 5,000 to 10,000 gallon spill in that watershed, and it was from digester waste. So it's not even getting rid of the waste. It's really not getting rid of the problem. What it is doing is giving subsidies to the CAFO owners to build those things and appear to be environmentally, to be green, I guess. So I would encourage you folks to educate yourselves on those because that is something that may be proposed. And then the long-term solution from Sierra Club's perspective is to support a shift away from the industrial agriculture system, which has a lot of negative impacts on our quality of life, and move towards sustainable agriculture through pressure on the agencies to revise the permit that they're doing right now that governs CAFOs to make it stricter, include a snow-throw ban, and any legislation that comes up. For instance, we've worked with legislators to introduce a snow-throw ban in the legislature and work through the means that we can, but also individually support local farms. You can find local farms at localharvest.org, or you probably have farmers markets nearby. But supporting the folks that are actually small scale and sustainable is key in keeping their markets alive, because the marketplace is imbalanced because of the subsidies that go to CAFO operators. And then here's some resources on this final page, just in case you want to learn more about CAFOs or some reports that we've done on the impact, the cross-section between subsidies and CAFO pollution. So that would be it.
And just to add a quick note, the House legislation that was introduced was from Representative Kevin Hertel, who's right from Macomb County, so right in the backyard. And then also, I forgot to mention this earlier, but when Gail mentioned the term earlier, I just want to reiterate, the Sierra Club is a nonpartisan organization. We are not affiliated with any major, minor political party or political affiliation. I think we'll open it up for questions at this point.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Brown?
I'm going to deal with Commissioner Carabelli.
Okay, Commissioner Carabelli,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
after him.
I try to get my arms around this and understand it. When you say 16,000 humans waste, are you saying that's for a year or a day? How are you saying that?
One cow produces the waste of 16,000 humans per year annually.
Sorry, would you repeat that?
One cow produces, one
They-
cow.
They produce more waste than a human.
Well, I can imagine them doing more, but
Yeah.
16,000 sounds like a big number. I like numbers, and it
Yeah,
stuck with me.
I can find the actual source if you need it. And send it.
After this, maybe you can get back with us on that.
Yeah, let me make a note of it.
You know, here in Macomb County, you don't need to do it right now, but here in Macomb County, we have issues where we're worried about taking our human waste and dumping it. And this is, we're talking is putting a lot of money and investment in infrastructure to stop it with the rain overflows and everything else we have going on. And we do want to be a region, and, Michigan, our whole environment is not a party thing. It's, we want to be good stewards. But at the same token, as I read through this, it talks about corporations, and it talks about, these big farms, and in your own documentation, it says that most of Michigan are family-owned farms. And when I look at, when you say immediate solution is to ban the application of waste of frozen, snow-covered ground with no exceptions, well, I look at it, a farmer doesn't do any work in the winter. It's an opportunity to get that fertilizer down, so first thing in the spring, it's out of the way, and he can be more productive on what he's doing. I'm not saying I'm right. This is just me thinking out loud. And as I go through this, and it says, or it requires sufficient storage to avoid frozen spills. Farmers need to plan and ensure for additional storage through the winters. This may make them reduce their herd sizes. And I'm looking at this, it's like we want our farmers. We want them to be productive. We want the local farmers, the family-owned ones, to do better than the corporate farmers. At least I do. I'd like to see the family farmers succeed. And if we're putting down all these restrictions of making them build new buildings and add all this cost to what they're trying to do, we may be putting them out of business to be competing with the corporate players. If I can just keep going just a little bit further, I looked at your resources for this, and I looked at the Food and Water Watch and the Sustainable Table, and I'm looking at it, and it basically, even in their mission statements, it says, in part, to stop corporations who put profits before humanity. But in your own documentation, it says that most of Michigan are family-owned, and I look at that as
But
at a
wouldn't-
bigger national problem. You're probably right, but here in Michigan and then down into our little community, I see this as hurting them.
Yeah.
Now, we all want to fix everything, but to put added costs onto a farm or a family-owned farm, are we going to put them out of business? Are the price is going to get too high and they can't compete with the big boys? I have serious reservations about it, and I need to, before I make a vote on this, do some more homework so
Yeah.
I can have an understanding. And again, we all want to be good stewards, but how we get there to be good stewards, we can't lose that sight of what may happen.
They may be family farms, though I want to make the distinction just so you know there's different, oh, I'm sorry. The distinction between family farms and corporate farms is important, but it doesn't mean that the family farms are not incapable of bad practices and being bad actors. And that's what the permit's about, and that's what this ban is about. It's about protecting the water quality, which is what I assume the push for this resolution was in the first place. So if that's what you're concerned about, then that's why that's needed. And in fact, we're part of there's been there's going to be three. There's been 2 stakeholder meetings on the CAFO permit review, which is the now EGLE, formerly DEQ, is reviewing. And they've invited lots of stakeholders to the table. Farm Bureau's at the table. We're at the table. A lot of agency staff are there. The agency staff itself has proposed to ban from January to March the application of waste. And there's a dialogue going on in the room, and those farmers know that that is something that they need to do. It's not like this is out of the blue and this is like unheard of. They are aware that there's a problem, and they will say that there are good actors and bad actors.
And ma'am, everything you said makes a lot of sense to me, and I don't disagree with anything you just said. But I also want to look at it at 10,000 feet and see the actual impact that it'll have as me as a consumer, as the family farm who's trying to operate, and there's bad actors, we all know that. But the bigger picture, you know what I mean, I need to get a better understanding. We talked about Lake Erie, right? Well, that flows into Ontario, correct? Yes. Okay, if that's the case, I'd like to see the studies of how it ends up in Ontario. Is that worse? Is it just because it's concentrated because down by Lake Erie, that's where the major problem is? Where's the true impact? Sure, everything runs together. Well, that means Lake Ontario should be a lot worse than Huron and Erie with the actual end product
Actually,
floating down there.
if you look at one of our studies, if you want to, after the fact, in 2015, we did a study of the Western Lake Erie watershed and the number of CAFOs in that area and the amount of pollution and the amount of waste generated. It's a confluence of 3 states with a lot of factory farms, and they're all funneling the waste
And
into
I'm not
Lake Erie.
disagreeing
That's-
with you. So the last thing I'd like to say is that the opportunity, I haven't talked to a farmer. I don't know what the impact is. Maybe they got better ideas to even help with what's going on. So, you know, when we look at an issue, it's, again, it's not a party thing, it's not a group against another group. It's about, okay, this is one side of what we're hearing. I personally, one commissioner needs to hear the other side so I can formulate a good decision. I'm done.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown?
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Research is a very important topic. Obviously, it affects all of our Great Lakes here. Macomb County is probably the best county in the state, if not the Midwest, in looking after water quality needs of our county as it relates to Lake St. Clair, since we've been the recipients of many issues out there. They come from a variety of factors, and you know, and these are all issues. This is one of the issues that we looked at with our Blue Ribbons on Lake St. Clair study. 2 of them we did, two studies on Lake St. Clair, and this was identified as one of the possible sources, one of the sources affecting water quality at Lake St. Clair. So it is an issue, and it needs to be addressed, and they have addressed it in some issues, and with no-till farming, injection of some of the material on there, someone just not doing it at all. There's a variety of ways that it's coming at. So this has to be part of the discussion, but anytime you say ban something, though, that probably going to go a bit too far when you toss ban out there. I've heard from your discussion with these panel groups, they're talking about ways that maybe ban certain times of the year rather than an outright ban, and maybe that's a way towards trying to reach common ground with all the stakeholders, including the agriculture interests, which, by the way, the farmers are the ones that care most about the land anyway, because that's where they make their living, and they definitely don't, and they're also aware of the fines, heavy fines are imposed by making a mistake and having stuff go into the creek and dump off into the river, because there's big fines that happen, so I understand that. I also sense a little concern about CAFOs themselves. Is this an attack, is this a way to attack the CAFO operation by raising this issue about what they're doing with their manure as a way to try to take down, destabilize or to take down the CAFOs? Because, I mean, they are large feeding operations, and we do everything well in America very efficiently, and agriculture is doing the same thing in the state. In fact, I think Michigan's like the 2nd or 3rd leading producer of milk in the country. So we've got a lot of producers making good money and making a profit from feeding the world through these CAFOs. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Bigger is better. I mean, you could have a small car factory, you know, or you have a big car factory, right? And as long as they're making cars and everyone's happy, it should be all right. But so I'm a little. Is your objective to take down CAFOs, or is your objective about this issue bringing us forward today? Because I think there's a little bit of I sense a little bit of a attack on the CAFOs. Could you please explain?
It's not an attack on CAFOs. We've been battling agriculture pollution for more than 2 decades in Michigan. We were at the table when the first permit was fashioned in the early 2000s, and we have not seen any progress in that 2 decades trying to work with the system. And we can see how compromised the water quality is now, and we know that agriculture pollution is contributing to the algae blooms, and it's a serious public health threat, and it's a serious environmental threat. Sierra Club is an environmental organization, and we're concerned about environmental issues. This is a huge environmental issue in Michigan.
The bigger issue is the billions of gallons of sewage going down the Clinton River, probably right now today, after all the rain we've having, every day coming down the Clinton River. That's where all your resources ought to be put down, telling Lance, instead, we all got permits to pollute the lake, right? They all got permits to discharge raw and semi-treated sewage. Candace Miller's in the Public Works Office, working aggressively to do what she can. And, you know, if you look at the total scope of the problem, yeah, there's some runoff in there going into the lake caused by agriculture. There's also some with failed septic systems that line our lake shore from cottages that have been up there since the 50s without replacing septic fields. Then 80 people move into the cottages over the holiday and blow them up, and then they end up in the lake. There's a variety of issues that affect it, and this is one. And but I'm
this
just
is the
uncomfortable with
most
the
significant.
term banning anything. It doesn't seem to be the appropriate way to go. And at a minimum, I'd say we at least have to get more information before we go on record as a board calling the ban, because there are a couple farms in our county that are affected by this. They fall in this classification. They're generational family farms, and that they're trying to hang on by a thread, because like everything else, they've got issues that deal with businesses like every other business with regulations. And so, you know, maybe we need to hear from them too to get some stamp on it. But this is something that's interesting. It's interesting you bring it forward. And you came to the right county, because we definitely get it here in Macomb County, because we've been on the forefront, ahead of anybody in the state, pushing the state to do the right thing. And you're to be commended for being part of those voices to do that.
Well,
So
thanks
thank
for
you.
inviting us. Appreciate it.
Yes, and
Thank you,
just,
Madam Chairwoman.
Quick response to the item on timing in particular. The reason for a ban versus just a certain time period, you all live in Michigan, you know that our weather and our winters are totally sporadic and bipolar. You know, there's sometimes where in March it's sunny, and you can go out and, ride your bike around town and do all sorts of things. There are also times in March when it's absolutely frozen and snow covered. And so that's why you need an outright ban on the practice of applying this on frozen and snow covered soil, not just a certain time period, because a time period is not reflective of the climate and the weather patterns that we're seeing in Michigan, kind of over the last decade or two. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, too.
Thank you. Commissioner Drolet?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. First, was the Macomb County Farm Bureau invited to be part of this here
No,
today?
they weren't, but that would be good to hear from them. I agree.
Yeah, I would like to hear from the farm industry as well, a number of questions. I'm still a little stunned by the statement that one cow equals 16,000 people. That means in the city of Sterling Heights, 125,000 people poops less than 8 cows. But you're saying that's the case? Wow, all right. I didn't realize that 125,000 people couldn't outpoop 5 or 6 cows or 8 cows, but okay.
Moving on.
Moving on, it's just an amazing stat that I've never heard. I mean, the whole county of Macomb County is only 860,000 people, so how many cows is that? 35 cows for the entire county?
Oh, good Lord.
But that is an amazing fact. A couple of questions on this. Well, first, Commissioner Brown, you mentioned that a few farmers in Macomb might be affected by this, but I believe this would affect all farmers in Macomb, because this is not just a CAFO bill that is being addressed in Lansing. So it's everybody who farms in any capacity, so not just one or two. It would be also nice to hear from that. Apparently, there's only one CAFO operation based on this information in Macomb, so it'd be nice to have them get their thoughts on it. So I guess my couple questions are on this is, you've mentioned the way that costs are externalized and pushed on the public. And I agree that happens. And I agree that, there's a lot of ways that subsidies happen in agriculture and other industries too, and I oppose those type of subsidies. But do you know what the cost would be for the containment facilities at these farms if they were to add adequate containment for their, say, what would the cost be to the average farmer?
Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know what the current cost is, but about 3 or 4 years ago, in the Farm Bill, I think the subsidy for, I'm trying to remember, it was like 285,000.
No, but I'm curious about what the cost of the containment, not the subsidy they're receiving from.
I'm assuming I think the subsidy cost covers the cost of the unit.
So they have already containment facilities for these things. So why do we need this bill? They don't need to put it on the frozen soil if they've got containment.
Because they're not containing it all in the lagoons when they're supposed to.
So what would the cost be of containing it like they're supposed to be?
There's no way I can know that. I mean, each farm has an individual, different situation, different number of animals.
So we're not sure what the cost would be of this, if this were to pass, for the farmers to provide adequate containment? No, okay.
If I might just mention, they're supposed to be doing this already. They're supposed to have that 6 months worth of storage. But the former Department of Environmental Quality, now Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, doesn't actually enforce this. And so in practice, this doesn't happen. But on paper, they're already supposed to have that if they're a farming operation, regardless of size.
So in other words, if they were complying with the existing law, we wouldn't need this bill.
Precisely.
Why not just enforce the existing law then,
That's why we
instead of passing the
Excuse me.
ban?
Can you guys please speak into the mic a little?
Yes.
We do record these and they go out, so
Thank
if you
you.
guys wouldn't mind with
So-
your answers, please speak
So
in the
wouldn't it
mic.
make more sense to enforce the existing legislation that requires adequate storage rather than pass an outright ban?
It's partly capacity.
The
Gail,
microphone,
microphone.
please.
The agency is historically underfunded, and if they have something like 8 district area people.
So how would they enforce the ban if they can't enforce a storage requirement? If they're that
Well, if they
underfunded?
see the actual practice happening, they can go out and enforce it.
And the law in 2011 was changed to be voluntary, not mandatory. Apologies. In 2011, the state legislature changed this from a mandatory regulation to a voluntary regulation.
Okay, so it's not requirement. It's a suggestion.
Strongly encouraged.
Precisely.
Strongly encouraged. So what would be the cost of it mandating it to the average farm, and how would that impact food prices?
They're supposed, as he pointed out, they're already.
Gail,
The
microphone.
microphone. No, they're suggested.
No, they're already supposed to be handling their waste sufficiently so that they don't have to do this.
Okay.
There is a loophole in their permit that says that under certain conditions, they can apply on frozen and snow-covered ground, but the agency has issued a strong statement saying, don't
So
do
this should have really no fiscal impact of any sort on the farmers then?
Yeah, not if they're complying with.
Microphone, please.
Sorry. Not if they're complying with their permit.
Okay, so it's a free mandate ban, and it won't impact the cost of food or impact the farmers at all. So therefore, we should have the Farm Bureau in full support and the Macomb County Farm Bureau in full support because of this free, no-cost ban.
They need to comply with their permit. If there's costs associated with that, then, and this forces them to do what they're supposed to be doing in the permit, then there might, I mean, that's a part of it.
And having this in statute allows us or citizen organizations or anybody that, has a concern or if there's a violation to file suit and take corrective action and actually get this action to be enforced, unlike what's happening currently.
So I appreciate that you guys are very well-versed in the issue and it's very important to you. And you guys did a good job making a presentation. But I sure would like to hear from the agriculture industry, the farm industry, to hear what they might think about this. And they may have a different perspective. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of discussion about water flow and watersheds. Do we have a position from the Macomb County Public Works Director, Candace Miller, on this at all? Have you
not-
talked to her?
We have not had a specific conversation with her about this, and I'm not aware of her position on it. I was going through her voting record at the federal level before today, and I didn't see any votes on this issue specifically.
That may be a suggestion moving forward. Also, I've seen this presentation before up in Lansing. That's how it got to be voluntary through legislation, 4 years ago, 6 years ago? And now you're looking to make it mandatory. Is that the difference in the legislation that was previously passed?
So this is one component of the regulations that was flipped from mandatory to voluntary. Those were the generally accepted management practices, or GAMPs, as the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development refers to them, and the MEAP program, the Michigan Agricultural Environmental Assurance Program. It's a mouthful. Essentially, this was one of the recommendations in there that was mandatory, was flipped to voluntary. There's a whole laundry list of other things that were designed to, make this a sustainable practice and environmentally protective that were also flipped to voluntary. So this is just one component. We figured this is the kind of lowest hanging fruit, the simplest thing to get across and communicate with folks about. that's why we're focusing on this specific issue with the ban, not that whole laundry list of issues at this time.
And you've listed Senate Bill 247 and House Bill 4418. Have those bills received a hearing yet?
Not yet. So Senator Rosemary Bayer in particular, not from Macomb County, but your neighbor right next door and the eastern component of Oakland County in the same watershed as you all, is the bill sponsor there, and she's on the Environmental Quality Committee chaired by Senator Rick Outman. They're currently in discussions about having hearings on this and bringing in not folks like Sierra Club, but potentially like Michigan State's agriculture experts and kind of academics and the farming industry leaders to talk more about this.
Did you say not to bring in the Sierra Club?
Yes, it might not be a surprise to you, but the folks in Lansing who can chair the committee, just being honest with you, don't normally care what the Sierra Club thinks about issues.
Oh, that's not a surprise to me at all. None whatsoever. Thank you.
We would love the opportunity, but we have not been invited yet. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Romano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good presentation, great presentation, I should say. Just some facts maybe for the commissioners who would like to know that. But right here in Michigan alone, we have over 52,000 farms. And on an average, they're saying for 2018, 143 of those closed, went out of business for whatever reason. And we're talking about, what does a cow produce? Cow produces about 65 pounds of poop a day. So in answer to, if you want to do the math, you're good at that. So my point is this, and I go along with Commissioner Carabelli. We've got a lot of farms here in Macomb County, and I can't compare a mom and pop farm to a corporate farm. I mean, a corporate farm has something 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 cows, or cows that produce it, whereas mom and pop farms have, what, 20 or 30 in their herd? They're milking cows. And to put a ban on this, I think would put an extreme, hard financial problem with them. And I don't think it would be just, I can't go along with this unless we get more information. I'd like to see the Farm Bureau here and maybe couple of the farmers from Macomb County. The idea is great, but this manure goes to, let's talk to United. They get a lot of manure. People ask for that on their grass. Am I correct, Mr. Commissioner Carabelli? People want the manure to finish up their grass. So it either goes in the grass and in the water, or it goes on the frozen snow and then it goes into the land itself. So just storing it, what are you going to do with the storage? Sell it to United? I'm picking on you, Commissioner Carabelli. My point is, I totally agree, and I agree with Mr. Brown too. Commissioner Brown, unless we get more information on this, I'm not prepared to sign this resolution. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Kleinfeld?
Okay, so you have been hit with almost all the Republicans, so that's why I said careful on the progressive. I don't mind the. Well, no, because she made the terminology about us being progressive, and we joked about that and said be careful. That's the only reason I said that. It was a joke. I would mention it. I missed what he said. He's not on mic. Anyway. Yes, I was going to say, maybe not 125,000 drillettes, but I'm willing to be. And by the way, I don't know if Commissioner Brown's chickens have been multiplying to a rate where he might have a lot. I have a serious question, though. I am from Montana, so I'm guilty. My family we're heavy meat eaters, so I know that I'm guilty and I need to do more on my part to have an effect on this whole situation. But what I wanted to know was, could you just very briefly explain what a digester is?
Yeah, it's,
Gail.
I'm not an expert. I just know that there are facilities that they build to take the animal waste and transform it into energy.
I can speak in
Oh, good.
just a tiny bit more detail. Essentially, they're energy units. This is really being pioneered by Michigan State and a lot of folks in Europe in particular, but it's really spread across the country. What they do is you take forms of waste and you run them through chemical processes, normally not incineration, but sometimes incineration. Which incineration is actually kind of the worst possible thing you can do because it releases all the volatile organic compounds into the air, which are really toxic if you breathe them in, if you live in a nearby community. But normally they go through chemical processes that release the methane from that waste. The methane is then recaptured, very much what like a lot of our landfills across the state do. Granger in particular is one of the largest pioneers of that in Michigan. That is a useful and kind of sustainable byproduct, but it is not something we want to be, shuttling more funds and resources towards. As Gail mentioned earlier, the problem with these digesters is that even after you extract that methane, the waste is still there, and it's almost more dense and volatile in that form, and then it goes right back to being applied on land. Another issue with this is that if it's localized, it can be efficient and sustainable. If you've got a digester right on, a large farm in particular, that is sustainable because you're essentially just pulling off a byproduct and not having to invest extra resources or time or effort into that. If you don't have a digester right on site, then you have to pay to truck or haul that over to the digester, and then the end product that comes out of the digester then gets shipped or trucked back to another area where then it gets applied to the land anyway. Shipping this stuff is really expensive and often can put so much of a burden onto the farmer cost-wise that most of them don't do it. And so lots of problems why that is not the solution to this waste problem. If it's localized, it can be a beneficial byproduct, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and last, Commissioner Kraft?
Thank you, Madam Chair. All the other Republicans spoke, so I had to get mine in. So you said it's HB 4418 from Representative Hertel, correct?
Correct.
And that's this term?
Correct.
Did he have any co-sponsors on that bill that you're aware of?
Yes, I don't have the list in front of me, but
Okay,
there
but
was a
there's-
group of, I want to say like 25 or 30 folks. I'm not sure if it's bipartisan. I think there were a couple Republican co-sponsors, but I would need to double check and get back to you.
Okay, and I'm assuming it's sitting in Ag Committee in the House?
Precisely. Ag in the House and then environmental quality in the Senate.
Okay, and then bills in Lansing are reused just like manure. So was there a similar bill to this last term from Representative Hertel or somebody else also?
Yep. Representative Hertel was the first and original author of this bill last session. The bill was introduced. We worked very hard to try to get a hearing on the House side and got no traction on that. So we want to give it another shot this cycle, especially right now is the timing where we're about to start seeing the toxic algae bloom in Lake Erie forming. So it's kind of the perfect time to be discussing this topic.
Okay. Do you have any idea what the bill number was last term offhand?
I don't have it memorized,
Okay.
but I can get it to you.
take a look. I was just curious. Okay. Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Bob? Chair Smith?
Hi. I just have a couple quick questions, and I'd like the answers to be kind of quick, so if you could narrow it down. When you say total a ban, when we talk a ban, we're talking about a ban just during the frozen time and the snow-covered and frozen time, right?
Correct.
And right now, is there a proposition, or is it in place that it's a time frame between January and March? Is that what's going on right now? And we're trying to change it to a ban with the snow cover, or is there two different options that they're looking at? One of them's January to March, and one of them's a total ban. Go ahead.
So the January to March is a proposal. It's not something that's actually being done right now. It's being discussed in the review process of the state's permit. They review it every 5 years. It just came up. And so they're reviewing that as a proposal. This would be an alternative they could consider as well.
Right, so you're looking at a ban that says when it's frozen or snow covered, who makes that determination? Because in one county it's frozen to snow covered, the other county it's not, and who, is that an individual honor system kind of thing, or how does that work?
So that would be determined by the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy at the state level. They have field offices in every county in the state and can monitor that if they have adequate funding.
So then theoretically speaking, during January, if it's a warm January, they might be able to.
Absolutely.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of get the overall scope of it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. What I'd like to see happen is for there to be a motion to postpone the vote. Oh, I'm sorry. First, we need to vote on the receive and file of the presentation, which, by the way, you did an excellent job. Thank you very much. So let's take that vote. My notes, there we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. It didn't, I have to. It passes 9-1. Commissioner Sauger voting no? Okay. On the presentation? Okay. Next, we'd like to do a motion to postpone the resolution to next month so that our Health and Human Services Committee meeting, so that we have, we give the Farmers Bureau the opportunity to present to us on the same topic. We'll get it to you in just 1 minute. Commissioner Drollet and Commissioner Kraft supporting. Let's vote on that.
It's going to be to the next Health and Human Services meeting, so there is a
July
date.
17th.
July 17th.
And that passes 10-0. Thank you again for coming. We really appreciate. Very knowledgeable.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for your time.
Okay, great. Our next item up is correspondence. Can I have a motion to receive and file? Commissioner Carabelli and Commissioner Romano. Take it in its entirety? Okay, thank you. Let's vote. No, it's okay. Correspondence 8-1, and Mr. Drollet says no. Oh, would you rather us, would you rather us break it up, or just, okay, all right, we're moving on. Any new business? Does anyone have new business? Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
Hi, two things very briefly. First, the Mackinac Policy Conference, Commissioner Carabelli, Kraft, Leonetti and I went, and I will tell you that it was a very good policy conference. I want to wait until all of us are here to actually discuss and go over the policies. So hopefully Commissioner Leonetti will be here tomorrow, and we're going to give a little update on everything that we talked about up there and some of the things that we've discussed. One of them, though, coming out of it was I had a meeting this afternoon with Dave Woodward and Alicia Bell, from a chair from Oakland and Wayne County, and we were going to resurrect the Tri-County Summit. Now, Tri-County Summit, some of you, have been here. Most of you haven't, though, I think, when we had the last one. And it's basically a commissioner-driven, and this has gone on for, God, tell me, Don, 20 years maybe. And it's kind of slacked off in the last few years, maybe due to a few of the other counties that were supposed to host it and didn't. But it did through it all, but we've had it since then, and that's the point. And it's a summit about things that are common to all three areas, all three communities, legislative body-wise, and we have, a nice summit about it. So we had a meeting today. We decided to bring it back. I think October 21st might be the date of it. We do have a meeting that day, but it should be done before then. I'm also going to try to put together a little work group anybody that might be interested in working on it. We sat down today and came up with a whole list of potential ideas that had cross-border appeal to all three of us, but we want everybody else in on that mix. So
Have a lunch out at the farm in my district.
There you go.
okay, we can do whatever we want. So I take it you're signing up for the work group. So if you would get with me in the next few days, we can put something together in the next week, and we're just going to kind of discuss like 2 or 3 topics on. I'm not sure I want you on this. So, anyway, I just wanted to let you know about that, and we'll talk more about the Mackinac Policy Conference hopefully tomorrow. So, thank you.
Commissioner Clemthal?
2 things. With respect to the Dems and Republicans, in reality, the only time that we do vote that way, we've talked about this when other commissioners in the past were on and introduced all kinds of things that were resolutions telling Congress what to do, resolutions telling what the state what to do. It's almost always the only time that we do find ourselves. That doesn't mean this is that situation, but a lot of those are like moral issues and things of that nature. It's almost always the only time that we find ourselves cut on partisan lines is when we're doing a resolution telling somebody else how we feel about what they're doing. I just wanted to point something out. On 6/19, we have a 2 o'clock internal services meeting, and we have a 3 o'clock public services meeting I think that's what, and Leonetti said he was looking at doing a 1 o'clock for the jail. And it occurs to me, I looked at the agenda on the 2 o'clock. What I don't want to do is have a 1 o'clock meeting and then sit from 1:30 to 2, and have a 2 o'clock meeting and then sit from 2:30 to 3. So whatever time they start, and it doesn't matter to me, if we could have the other two just being immediately following the last one instead of setting a time frame.
She was gonna change that already, she just said, but in that, we'll do that.
We were gonna do a joint meeting for the 2 o'clock before he added the 1 o'clock, because, we have SEMCOT coming for the 3 o'clock, so I thought we could start the public service items, and then when they come, they can present, so, because I need to give them more of an exact time, so they're just not hanging out all afternoon, but,
We'll do
them-
immediately following on, and let's, point of information, Commissioner Leonetti is looking at putting the jail on, but that's all dependent on them getting the information to us in time.
yeah.
Okay,
So we
he just
discussed that
mentioned it to me, he wasn't gonna be here today, and I had a conversation with him about the 2 meetings. And could we, whatever the time is, and what we could do is if we make them joint meetings, is when SEMCOG comes in, we could always move them up on the agenda if we're going to.
That was my plan. Mike and I had already looked at that, and talked about doing a
Okay.
joint meeting, so that didn't happen.
Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Commissioner Drollet?
Follow up to Commissioner Romano's question. If it's 65 pounds of waste from a cow, divide that by 16,000 human beings, each human waste has to be 0.0040 in weight. So less than 2 grams.
Ask for what?
Motion adjourned, yeah.
Well, we have to ask for public participation. Asking once, asking twice, no public participation, a motion to adjourn. Motion, Commissioner Drolet, supported by Commissioner Hall.